I have to begin by disagreeing with Friedman. Friedman claims the world is flat, but I think the world is round. Actually, it is round. Because things come around in interesting ways. 10 years ago, I was standing before an audience in the United States talking to them about how they can Indianize global brands and how we wouldn't make mistakes like the Kellogg company did, like Mercedes-Benz did, like Motorola did coming into the Indian market and not understanding the local market. And I think the time is interesting. 10 years from now, we're now talking about globalizing Indian brands. And how do we take what is made in India and make it global? And how do we arrive on the global stage? Not just as Indians, but as branded Indian products and services. So to that extent, I think that this is a very interesting reversal, that until the beginning of liberalization, what has happened is that multinational companies have been entering the Indian market with their brands. I think now it is time to reverse the flow of the Ganges. Now the Ganga should go in the opposite direction, where we take our brand and go to the world. But first I want to explore just a few questions with you. And the first question I'm going to look at is, what really do we mean by a brand? What is the real meaning of a brand? Because I think it's important to set some definition, some context. Then I want to reflect on why is it so important to think about branding? And why is branding an underexplored and underexploited and underleveraged discipline in the Indian context? Then I want to look at, what is the distinction between brand India and Indian brands? India is a brand too, but we're talking about Indian brands. What is the distinction and the relationship between the two? And then I just want to reflect on what it will take for Indian brands to go global and to win globally. So that's what I'm going to try and do over the next 30 minutes or so. So what is a brand? Typically we associate a brand with a logo or a symbol or a tagline or a trade dress or something like that, but that's not what it's about. What a brand ultimately is, it is a set of meanings and a set of feelings that reside in the hearts and minds of customers. A brand lives in the hearts and minds of your customers. It is everything that they experience when they interact with you or interact with your company's products and services. It is the sum total of the experiences that they have with your company. And therefore, brands are built up over time through interaction with the brand and the brand sponsor. And every action you take is an act of branding. And these actions have to be consistent over time if you are to build a strong brand image. And you can't be inconsistent across the different ways in which you touch people. And therefore, every employee in your company is a brand ambassador, because everything that everyone does touches and impacts how customers experience your brand. Now I have to tell you a little bit of what happened last night. I flew in last night, and as I was entering the immigration hall, of course the queue is backed up to the escalator. And as I was standing in the queue for an hour, I had a lot of time to examine Incredible India, the ad, in the immigration hall. Now that's an inconsistency. You're saying Incredible India, and here I am 1 hour in the queue after an 18-hour flight. So that's inconsistent. Think about the following, and if there are any government people in the audience who manage the immigration operation, think about this. What is the first touch point that a foreigner has to India? It is that immigration hall. And you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So why don't we fix that operation? Labor, I believe, is cheap, so you can have more people clearing the queues. The other thing that I don't understand is, why is the Indian queue shorter now and the foreigner's queue is longer? Are we saying that you're not welcome if you have a foreign passport? So that's also all impacts the brand, the perception that people have about our country. So with that in view of what a brand is, it's the sum total of all meanings and all feelings that the customers have. Let's think about why branding is so important. And by the way, why hasn't it been talked about so much traditionally in the Indian context, particularly within the public sector units? See, there's a basic problem with the way marketing has been done in India, and I grew up here, that India has traditionally, until 10, 15 years ago, been an economy of shortages. I still remember the days when you had 10-year queues for a phone, and there was a revolutionary service created called OYT, Own Your Telephone. Wow, you paid 8,000 rupees and you were owned a little black phone. And now, mobiles are being thrown like potatoes on the street. Cars, you remember the days when you had a 5-year queue and a black market for the Marutis, and now they come home and deliver them to you and finance them for you. So India was an economy of shortages, and in an economy of shortages, you don't do marketing. You don't need to. Any color as long as it's black. That's what Henry Ford said. So we didn't have to worry about all this. If you have a monopoly, you don't need to worry about service. Indian Airlines never advertised. They didn't need to. They were the only game in town. And therefore, traditionally, marketing and branding in many categories has not been a skill that has been well developed in the Indian management discipline. With some exceptions. The exceptions are the consumer packaged goods industry, where companies like Hindustan Lever or Colgate or Nestle have been leaders. But in the durable categories, in services, and particularly amongst the public sector organizations, branding was never something very important. Marketing was not something that was very important. But that has changed now. So that has changed, and I think that the time has come now to start thinking about brands more strategically. Because when customers have a choice, that is when differentiation becomes important, and that is when it becomes really important to think about what your value proposition is and how do you differentiate yourself. Now, with that said, if you think about why Indian companies, as they go global, need to think about branding, if you think about what India has accomplished, it has been incredible in the past 10 years. India now is acknowledged as a world powerhouse in software and IT-enabled services. Indian companies are doing very well in high value-added manufacturing, whether it is automotive components or in other industries like pharmaceuticals. So I think a lot of progress has been made. However, still, we are India inside. We are ingredients. We are providing services that go into products. We build software for companies that then make a lot of money from those products. Even in pharmaceutical, we are big in generics. But what about the branded drugs like Lipitor and so on that make $5 billion or $6 billion in revenue a year? So the problem is that if we continue to just be good service, be the service industry of the world, the back office of the world, and the manufacturers for the world, we are not going to extract the profits. The profit is extracted by the owner of the brand and the owner of the relationship with the customer. There's a Hindi proverb that says, "Mehnat kare murga, anda khaye fakir." So we end up doing all the hard work, and the value is extracted by the people who own the brands. So unless we forward integrate and unless we take our branded offerings into the world markets, we are not going to grow a Microsoft or a Pfizer or a Pixar. These are all companies that have built, or an Apple, that have built phenomenal brands for themselves. Because think about Apple. Apple doesn't make anything. They make it all in Taiwan. They make it all in China. But have you even heard of the name BenQ or HTC? These are the companies, the poor guys who are working 18 hours a day making these iPods. But they don't get any glory. So we need the glory. We need to be in front. That's where the value is. That's where the value addition is. So I believe that the next frontier for India, the next frontier for Indian companies as they go global, is to beef up their marketing and branding skills as they go abroad. And by the way, this will require us not only to build Indian brands, but to think about India as a brand. So here I'm going to make a distinction between brand India and Indian brands and how they interact with each other. If you think about brand India, what does that mean? India as a brand. Well, what are the associations that people have with India? They've changed significantly over the past 10 years. When I went to the United States 17 years ago, I'm not kidding you, somebody once asked me, "Do you guys still live on trees?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "How do you get up there?" I said, "We have escalators." So the traditional notion of the associations, every brand has a set of associations. So the brand India, the associations were poverty, overpopulation, disease, natural disasters, snake charmers, you name the bad thing and, well, yeah, we had some culture too, but, and an exotic tourist destination that was too dangerous to go to. Those are the kinds of associations. Those have been replaced with some newer associations which are much more positive, which is an engineering powerhouse, smart engineers, IITs, and really a leader in engineering and engineering talent. So I think that brand India is on the move, and I like the sort of distinction that I see between the two-pronged approach of incredible India and credible India. Incredible India being the tourist aspect of it, and credible India being a credible, business destination where the system works and so on. So I think that brand India has come a long way, but also what happens is that I believe now India is a brand and Indians are a brand. I'm telling you that, our IQ seems to have gone up by 20 or 30 points in the United States. When we talk to people, say, you're from India, you must be really smart. So I said, whatever, I'll take it. I was in a taxi in San Jose, and he says, he was an Indian guy. He says, where are you from? I said, where did you study? So I said, I went to IIT. He says, I tell people also I went to IIT. They give me 20 extra IQ points. So Indians have really arrived as a brand, and I think that the IITs have done a phenomenal job, and NASSCOM has done a phenomenal job really promoting the concept of India and Indians. And and it is really heartening to see now. And of course, the Indian diaspora in the United States has also done very well, particularly in Silicon Valley, in academia, in engineering, and in the physical sciences, in medicine. So, but what we have not done so far is built Indian brands. So brand India and Indian brands reinforce each other. If you think about brand Japan, how was brand Japan built? Brand Japan was built with Sony, it was built with Toyota, with Honda, with Canon. These were the brands that really led to a change in the perception of what Japan does, or what Japan is about. And therefore, while India is a brand, I would argue for you that what does made in India stand for today in the world? Not very positive things. Made in India probably means chalta hai quality. That's our approach. We don't have Six Sigma, we have chalta hai. That's another quality movement, which we need to get rid of. We need to get beyond that. Because we've been optimizing for the domestic market. I'm very proud of Tata Motors and what they do, and they're taking the Indica and selling it in Europe. But I was not so happy to see that it was rated as the worst quality car in Europe launched a couple of years ago. And there was almost laughable quality. So we need to do better in terms of improving our reputation and image. And in fact, in a recent study that was done that compared the MNC brands with the Indian brands tend to compete based on value and economy, while the MNC brands like a Sony or a Samsung or an Intel or a Procter & Gamble tend to compete based on style, based on engineering quality, and based on innovation. So that's what we need to get associated. We've got the innovators, but our brands and our brand values don't reflect that innovation. So as a country, we will have to change our perception of made in India. And by the way, this has been done before. This has been done in the 80s by Japan. Made in Japan was a joke in the 80s. The cars that were made in Japan, the joke was they were like Japanese beer cans. They would crush and disappear in an accident. And now Japan is held up as the paragon of quality. They are, and Toyota is head and shoulders above the world auto industry. So Japan achieved this. Then came Korea in the mid-90s. Hyundai was a joke. How do you double the value of a Hyundai? You fill the gas tank. It doubles in value. So that was the cheapness perception. Samsung, perceived as a cheap knockoff company that produced low-cost and low-value electronics. Today, Samsung's brand is more valuable than Sony. Samsung is perceived as a manufacturer of stylish products that are appealing, that are innovative. The same thing with Hyundai. Hyundai is the fastest growing brand in North America And today, the Hyundai Sonata, which is their mid-size car, ranks higher in quality than the Toyota Camry or the Honda Accord. So Korea has done it. And in the India, of course, you see LG and what they have accomplished in the white goods market. They are a market leader by far. So if Korea, and now who's coming next? The Chinese. Made in China is still a joke. So, Chinese are getting into the automotive market and they plan to sell $7,000 cars in the US. And right now, nobody gives them any odds of success. But they're coming. Lenovo is coming. Haier is coming. Nanjing Automotive is coming. And how is Nanjing Automotive coming? Not as Nanjing Automotive, but they've bought the MG brand. And they're going to make the MG Rover cars manufactured in China but branded in the United States. Buying up a brand. Lenovo has done the same by buying the IBM brand and using the IBM branding and the manufacturing capability of China, put that together and you have a very winning business model. So I think the time has come for us to build these brands and make them global. Today, I would argue that the only truly global brands that India has are in the IT sector. Wipro, TCS, Infosys, HCL, Satyam, these are international brands. And why? Because they never focused on the domestic market. They were always focused on the international market, and therefore they built their reputation and built their brand values around what the global market needs. But I think we need to do the same with consumer durables. We need to do the same in other sectors. Now the question though is, how do we get there? What are the approaches we need to take? What are the strategies we need to adopt? And I'll take you through a 3 or 4 step process. Step 1 is for Indian companies to understand which domains can we compete in globally. I don't think every industry and every sector is amenable to globalizing brands. I think we need to focus on a few sectors where we have a distinct competitive advantage. These include, of course, knowledge-intensive services, IT-enabled services, but also high-value-added manufacturing. Companies like Bharat Forge that do a phenomenal job, because this automotive components is high-value-added manufacturing, precision engineering, or entertainment and media content. Yes, Bollywood can compete with Hollywood, or other areas like pharmaceutical, which are R&D intensive, biotechnology, as we heard this morning. This requires a lot of human talent, because human talent is the biggest asset that Indian companies have. So in addition to this, we have other things like we can draw on our traditional strengths in Ayurveda. So I think that the whole wellness business and brands built around wellness, not disease prevention, but wellness, whether that is spirituality or yoga or Ayurvedic medicine, those are areas where before the Texans patent neem, we ought to be building our brands because there was the Texans have patented Ayurvedic products. So be careful. These are the sectors we need to focus on, sectors that demand scientific talent, that demand engineering expertise, that are knowledge intensive, that are high value added. On the other hand, there are sectors that we should not be focusing on for globalization. For example, if you look at some consumer packaged goods categories, the brands that have been built and the products that have been built, whether it is Nirma or whether it's the Hindustan Lever products or the Colgate toothpaste or the snack foods, they are extremely localized for the local customer. And they are not global in their orientation or their needs. So there are sectors that we don't need to, there are other sectors where we can't compete on scale with the Chinese, batteries, toys, things like that where we've lost the scale game, liquid crystal display, LCD televisions and so on. Those are areas where we really can't compete because China has the volume. So first thing is to pick the domains. Having picked the domains, the next thing we need to do is to build a global brand name and a global brand positioning. Now, it's very interesting to note. Think about the brands from Japan. What are their names? Sony, Canon, Honda, Toyota, you name it. These are English-sounding names. This is not an accident. That the Japanese chose were very deliberately brand names that are easy to pronounce, that translate well into every language, that were short and sweet, and they were built with a global intent. Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited doesn't fit the bill. Neither does the industrial credit and investment Corporation of India, which now, of course, by the way, I will predict that there will be a lot more acromonizing because now it's ICICI. One suggestion I have, we are proud of being Indians and we are proud of, being in India, but your brand name should not contain Hindustan, India, or Bharat. It should, if it does, put it in an acronym, if you want to take your brand global. Because that is, it has to be something that translates well. I was in Beijing last month giving them similar advice, and they've got the same problem. Li Yi Milk Company, that's the largest milk company in China. I said, I'm sorry, but you got to call this, Amul or something like that. Amul is a good brand that way, because it's simple, easy to pronounce, and so on. So we have to think global, even in terms of our names, but more importantly, we got to think global in terms of our positioning of our brands. And here I will make the following observation, that the way that brand positioning has been done in India assumes a competitive context that is different from what you will find when you go global. So if you are selling wireless service here, or in the early days, if you were selling wireless service, you were competing against MNTL, you were competing against landlines. But now the game has changed. Similarly, if Tata Motors is competitive here, they are competitive because their cars are rugged, and their cars are durable, and their cars are reliable, but that's not what wins the game in the foreign markets. Because in the foreign markets, your cars need to be stylish, they need to have good design, and those are different values. So what I'm arguing is that many of the brands that have been built in India, the positioning has been based on the local market conditions, because we have traditionally been an inward-looking country, and the companies have been inward-looking, because the domestic market has been the area of focus. But as we take those brands global, we need to come up with positioning strategies and positioning themes that are global in nature, and then adapt them to the local context. Just like, if you think about what McDonald's stands for worldwide, McDonald's stands for wholesome, family-oriented, fast, fun food family. That's what it stands for. Now that has been translated into different market contexts very, very selectively, but with the same basic idea that if you go to McDonald's, it will be convenient, it will be reliable, it will be clean, and it will be good value. And that is a value that translates across the world. So we need to establish positioning strategies that are global in their intent, that are designed to be taken abroad, and for that we will need to think about how we globalize the positions that we have. With that said, what I think we need to do is maybe make brand India an ingredient in the Indian brands, particularly in the technology area. If we can add this aspect, one brand value we can add in every one of our brands is ingenuity, Indian ingenuity. Similarly, in pharmaceutical brands, we can add traditional medicine. So what I would say, I sometimes tell people that if you have a tree, if you have old roots and new shoots, you get great fruits. So if we have roots in tradition and roots in our traditional capabilities, but with a twist of modernity, I think that will be a good brand positioning, so that we shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that we are Indian, and brand India should be part of the ingredients, but it needs to be made global in its intent. So that's, I think, that is important. Then we need to localize this positioning for each of the markets that we operate in. And this is what actually, here I would suggest a very simple strategy. Take a look at what the MNCs have done when they've come to India and reverse that strategy. Because what it took Kellogg Company to do to build cereal that was not, cold cereal and so on in India, Indian companies will have to do as in reverse as they think about the global customer. And for this, you will need to understand global customers a lot more carefully. Now, the other thing that I think is very careful is to pick the markets that you want to go global in. And here I would say a big word of caution is don't jump into the United States market, particularly if you're in consumer packaged goods, durables, or so on. It is a very competitive market. It's okay for IT services and so on for you because it's a very big market. But what you need to do is to look at initially markets that have similar characteristics to India. And Chinese companies are smart about this. Kongka which is a Chinese company, they didn't go to the US, they went to Australia. They're the #2 player in Australia now in consumer electronics. And so similarly, what we need to do is to look at, for example, Tata trucks. You know that Tata trucks designed for 5 tons are actually carrying 20 tons. They call it Punjab body. You know, so those trucks are built like tanks. Now, where else do you need trucks like that? Africa, right? Where there are similar road conditions, similar environmental and usage considerations. So what we need to do is to say, if we have built some unique capabilities in the Indian market, before we jump into the US market, use these other markets as stepping stones. Because it is very important to not try to go after a market that is so large that will require resources that are simply beyond you. So I would suggest that you want to phase your approach and go towards sort of in a sequenced approach. Also, I think that what you need to do is to think about what strategy you're going to use to globalize your brand. And here again, let me recommend a few different approaches. So one approach to globalize your brand is actually to buy a global brand or buy an international brand. This is sort of what Lenovo did in acquiring the IBM PC business. And by the way, I believe that more and more Indian companies, as they become bigger and have more capital, you're already seeing this in the IT space, you're seeing this in the pharmaceutical space, you're seeing this in engineering, but more and more you will see that companies, Indian companies will acquire brands. You know, if you're Tata Motors, you know, maybe Jaguar is up for sale. You know, they can't make any money. Maybe we can make Jaguars with Tata Engineering and use the brand equity that they have. There are a lot of very valuable brands that are going for cheap because the cost base or the engineering capabilities that they have are dying. So there may be opportunities to pick up these brands on the cheap. The same thing may happen in IT services. Supposing you have an IT services company that has a good customer base and a good brand, but their cost structure is too high. You keep the front end, rip out the back end, move the back end to India, and suddenly you have an interesting combination. I believe the winning company of the future might be one that has its manufacturing in China, its R&D in India, and its marketing and brands in the United States and Western Europe. This is the arbitrage that you might have. This is what will make the world truly flat. So that is one approach. Another approach is to actually go and partner selectively with retailers, power retailers in the US. So Samsung did this, for instance. Samsung went and partnered with Best Buy, which is a big consumer electronics retailer, and built products specifically for Best Buy. Now, why does Best Buy like that? For two reasons. One is they make more money on private labels. The second thing is that they want to compete against Walmart and have something unique. So if you partner selectively with specific OEMs or partner with selectively with specific retailers, you may have the opportunity to co-brand your products and to enter into the market with an ally. So generally speaking, the strategies for building a global brand is make, buy, or ally. Make is to build your own brand from scratch. Buy is to acquire, and ally is to enter into partnership. And depending on the context, these strategies might be, different strategies might be advisable. So Ranbaxy, for instance, is building a brand through its own. I mean, it is doing some acquisitions, but is trying to build its own global brand. That is the most expensive strategy, but it is more enduring in the long run. Now, so these are some. The other thing that I've seen very cleverly done, it's only a stepping stone strategy, is to realize that there is a friendly market out there in the global world, and that's the Indian diaspora, people like me. You know, the Indian diaspora is about 18 to 20 million strong, and they have lots of money. So initially, you may want to target these people as friendly customers who have some brand equity from their old days. And that's what ICICI is doing. Right? When ICICI goes abroad, they don't compete with Citibank. They compete with Citibank NRI services because that's where they have a competitive advantage, and that's why they use Shah Rukh Khan as their global brand ambassador. Shah Rukh Khan has zero relevance outside of the NRI community. So we are fascinated by cricket, we are fascinated by film stars, and that becomes your brand ambassador. So it's not a bad strategy to start with, but if I was ICICI, I would be thinking beyond this. And once I think beyond this, I then got to get, you know, I don't know, Demi Moore or somebody, I don't know, somebody more current, Charlize Theron or Catherine Zeta-Jones instead of Shah Rukh Khan. Although Aishwarya Rai is a global brand, so I think that would work. So we have to think of, so that's an NRI-based strategy or Indian diaspora-based strategy, might work only in selected categories. I think it will work well in financial services because it's about money. It might work well in telecom. It might work well in some very selected areas, but it won't work for, say, automobiles or consumer packaged goods and so on. So these are just some of the approaches that we can use to build the brands. But I think that the last thing that I want to say in this context is that none of this is possible without a change in mindset. And the fundamental mindset change that we have to go through is that a brand is not just do some advertising and write some clever copy. A brand is really a sustained commitment and a sustained investment that a company makes over a long period of time. It is not for the faint-hearted, and it is not a commitment that you take lightly. So if you want to build a global brand, you really have to think long-term, think strategically, and be prepared to make the investment. And while it may not seem important today, and by the way, even in the Indian market, I was just having a conversation about what's happening in retailing in India. Well, right now, the market is so hungry for retail, innovative retail stores. There are no supermarkets, today, that anything you set up, bikega. No, you don't need to do branding, shanding, all that stuff. Just set up a kirana store, it will work. Reliance will work. Bharti will work. 5 years down the road, they will need to think about this. And this is no different from a conversation that I had with the Microsoft folks. And Steve Ballmer said to me, he says, 10 years ago at Microsoft, we didn't need marketing because the value proposition was very self-evident. So this is DOS, it's green screen, this is Windows, it's graphical. Yeah, I get it. This is Microsoft Excel and Word, this is Office, it works as one. Very obvious what the value proposition was, and the technology market was so hungry for functionality, they didn't need to do any marketing. But now, Office 2003, Office XP, Office 2007, what's the difference? And they are really struggling now. They need to get much smarter about marketing. And that's what we've been helping them with, is that I believe that as markets go from shortages to surpluses, marketing becomes more important, and branding becomes more important. And as the competition revs up, within the Indian market, I think the only way for us to be competitive in the Indian market is to have a global orientation. And this is the basic distinction between India traditionally and Japan. Japan has always been about exports-led growth. India has been about growth-led exports. The 5% that's surplus we'll export. If you do that, you will never build your product or your brand with a global orientation. So I think the time has come to really think globally. Only then we will be able to compete locally. So I hope this gives you some perspective on why brands matter, what is a brand, why should we care about brands, and what are the steps in taking an Indian brand global. Thank you.